But I'll
Mhm.
go out on a limb and I'll make a prediction here that 10 years from now, we may all be communicating using a new language which was invented for us by AI. I got a birthday email from my son.
Okay.
He wrote this beautiful long Japanese letter, and I saw that, and I went to my wife and I said, I really honestly don't think that he wrote that. I think that the AI wrote it. I was researching so well, and all of a sudden, AI bots came up with fabulously interesting references to 1,000-year-old Japanese literature, where the
That's
word
very
that
interesting.
word soul, which is still being used today, 1,000
Okay.
years later, uh, Japanese literature where that word is being used. So AI can help us in our process of intellectual appreciation of a foreign language.
Do you think people, their intellectual capabilities can get dented because they will not have to use it now? And
There's two schools of thought, which is that words lie at the basis of human cognition. Then there's another school of thought, which is that human thought precedes words, and words are like a product.
hey guys, welcome to Better Engineering and Management podcast. Today we have a very dynamic guest, Bob Myers, joining us to discuss what role AI can play in learning new languages. Bob Myers has spent a lot of time traveling into multiple countries, including Japan, India, and of course, US, where he has not only worked, but he has also developed a great understanding of their cultures, their languages, and relationships. Bob is a committed software architect and has worked in many startups and large enterprises. Bob, please welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much for having me.
Bob, please give a small brief about yourself.
Well, hello everyone. Thanks for listening to this podcast. I'm kind of a hybrid in the sense that I'm both a software engineer and I'm a lover of languages. I love speaking languages. I know several languages. I also have spent a lot of my career working with languages in the form of localization and translation. I've done a great deal of translation myself, actually, um, mainly from Japanese to English, that I think has given me quite a bit of insight into the translation process. And so I've been bouncing back and forth between software engineering and computer science and linguistics and localization. And today I hope to have an interesting conversation about what the advent of AI means for um, all of those things.
Sure, Bob, that's very, very interesting to hear because it's not very common to come across people who can speak multiple languages, particularly, languages like Japanese, which are pretty different and, kind of, it's great to hear that. And so, Bob, tell me, how do you think, what role can AI play in learning new languages like Japanese or Chinese?
So when you ask yourself the question, when you start talking about learning a new language, you have to start off with the question of why are you learning the language? And we use languages in many different contexts and environments in our lives. We use language, in our home to tell our partner that it's time to take out the garbage. Um, we use language in our local life when we go to the dry cleaners to drop off some cleaning. We use language at work to present ideas. We communicate knowledge. We talk to our children. We talk to our lovers. um, we gather political information in a particular language. So, um, a traditional reason for learning a language was that I want to be able to do all of those things in some other language. I want to be able to operate in a foreign country where they speak a different language. I want to be able to consume sources of information in other languages. I want to be able to tell someone that only speaks another language some idea that I have or something I want them to do. And The interesting thing that's happened with the advent of AI is that in a remarkably short period of time, probably only 3 years, the ability of the AI systems to translate between human languages has improved by a factor of 1,000. And probably, 5 years ago, if you asked somebody when would a computer be able to translate fluently, truly fluently between two languages, even Romance languages, they would have told you it's 5, 10, 15, 20 years away. And we've already reached that point. So we've now reached the point where there is literally no subject area, topic area that AI bots cannot translate with remarkable fidelity. And so I can talk more about that, but the the fact that that has occurred basically means that it's no longer necessary for me to learn a foreign language in order to be able to communicate, with a Italian street vendor when I visit Rome,
Okay.
because I can just put on my Google glasses, which are going to come out very, very soon, I hear, and tell them, I want a snow cone in Italian.
Interesting.
Um, so the question becomes, why? The more important question is not how you learn a language in 2025, but why you learn it. And my basic assertion is that you learn it for enjoyment. You learn it as an exercise, as an object of, intellectual aesthetics. It's another field of study that stimulates your mind and gives you pleasure as you examine the way that a language is constructed and used. So we have to shift our mindsets towards learning languages as yet another intellectual endeavor, not a practical way to communicate.
So what I understand is what you're saying is the purpose of learning the language will define how easy it is or difficult it is, because let's say someone just wants to spend some time in Japan as a traveler, right? He will just want to learn it for fun and to communicate with the street vendors, or let's say shopkeepers, and on the wherever he's staying, right? Maybe he wants to go for shopping, or he wants to kind of go for sightseeing, and there he would like to communicate. So the purpose is different. But let's say there is a technologist who wants to study Japanese journals. What if whatever they are printing on those journals in very formal language, right? He would need to have a different kind of approach to understanding that language. Is that what you're trying to say? Right?
Well, you're absolutely right in identifying those different kinds of use cases, and there's other use cases as
Mm,
well. So
okay.
um, for the person visiting Japan and wants to be able to sort of order ramen in a Japanese restaurant,
Mm,
um, the there's really going to be no reason for him to learn Japanese.
mm-hmm.
And there's going to be even less reason over the next 6, 12, 18, 24, 36 months as
Okay.
these technologies become more wearable.
Mm-hmm.
And, at some point also we're going to have, embedded translation capabilities so that, there will be chips in people's ears that will automatically, translate things that they hear. Um, so the advantage of learning Japanese in that case is, first of all, do you gain personal satisfaction from being able to actually produce the Japanese yourself?
Mm-hmm.
And do you feel like being able to speak in Japanese directly, natively,
Mm.
is, you know, going to create a stronger relationship with that
The
person
language.
that you're talking to? And that may include a potential, uh,
Mm.
lover, right? You want
Okay.
to be able to speak in your native language to your lover. Then now there's a good reason for learning foreign languages that has been there for thousands of years.
So
Um,
do you think technologies like AI can help you actually learn the language? Let's say I have a personal interest in learning Japanese, and I don't, not really for translational purpose, but actually I'm interested. Can these technologies help in any way? I mean,
So um, I would I would divide the topic of learning a language into at least two major buckets, right? And the
okay,
first
okay.
one is um, actually being able to, create meaningful utterances um, that, the other person can understand. So
Mm-hmm.
you want to say, I have a pen, or,
Mm-hmm.
I want some salmon sushi, right?
Mm-hmm.
In this case, there's lots of ways which AI can help. And assuming you want to do
Okay.
that, assuming you've decided
Mm-hmm.
that's important, which I think, as I'm repeating myself, I think it's less important now than it was in the past. Assuming you want to do that, then there's lots of ways that AI can help. There are 100 different, online apps and systems and pre-programmed AI chatbots that will help you learn vocabulary, learn grammar. Duolingo is one. Duolingo is
Mm-hmm.
already using AI extensively to
Okay.
help generate their tests, their sort of uh, samples of things,
Voices.
vocabulary
Okay.
and things for people to learn. And we've seen cases where AI can now listen to people speak the foreign language and offer corrections for the
Mm-hmm.
foreign language. We have AI systems which implement a form of spaced repetition, which is the technology where if you're trying to learn a word, you learn it.
Mm-hmm.
It keeps bringing back the word like once a week or once every 3 weeks and reminds you of it until you
Okay.
finally absolutely learned it. That's the thing called spaced repetition, and AI can help and do a better job than existing spaced repetition systems. So if someone is interested in learning Japanese for those reasons, then there's lots and lots of resources
Okay.
for AI to help them.
So what I understand is there are many apps and services which can help you by kind of giving you, they will basically help you build a vocabulary and some other words which you can use, and they will also kind of keep reminding you, repeating certain words which are more important so that you don't forget them. You also mentioned an app called Duolingo, which is pretty popular for learning languages, and it is also using a lot of AI these days to enhance its capabilities. And we also discussed that AI can actually act as a bridge for two people who want to communicate in two different languages without learning the language actually. So it's like you were talking, let's say I'm a local Hindi and I want to talk to somebody in Japanese. I can use an app. The AI based apps are already become so advanced that when I'm talking in Hindi, it can actually understand it, convert it into Japanese, and kind of the other person who would be listening it in Japanese. And when he's talking in Japanese, the central service in the AI service would actually listen to it, convert it into Hindi, and when I will be listening, I will be listening to it in Hindi. So there is no learning required because AI is already
Learning
doing the
required,
mediation. Okay.
nor is there learning required to read the Japanese, scholarly article. But before we get there, I wanted to mention one other thing about language learning when you are actually trying to learn the language yourself, which is this idea I mentioned earlier, which is learning a language as a something fun to do, right? So I'm something that's intellectually stimulating. When it's like gardening, right? I just spend time puttering in my garden, learning about different plants, trying out different things. You can take the same approach to learning a language, which is it's less focused on being able to actually produce that language in like real life situations, and it's more focused on understanding the language. How is it constructed? How is the language being used? Where did the language come from? Where are some of the etymological, aspects of that language? Where does that language fit within the tree of evolution of human languages? So you could study quantum physics if that's your thing, and keep your mind occupied doing that, or you could study languages. And my focus right now, I have a Substack which is called Nihongoism. Nihongoism. This is a pitch, okay? It's spelled Nihongo. That's Nihongo, which means Japanese. Ism,
Okay. Okay.
Nihongoism. And the whole point of Nihongoism is looking at Japanese and learning about it as an object of beauty
Okay.
and appreciating it and loving it,
Okay.
and also learning how the nature of Japanese, uh, how it helps us understand the nature of the Japanese personality and
Okay.
Japanese history and Japanese culture. So we can take a Japanese word today, trace it back 1,000 years,
Mm-hmm.
and understand how that word, what role that word has played in the evolution of Japanese culture over the last 1,000 years. So I think
Mm-hmm.
you're gonna find more and more people studying language. I hope that's my theory for that
Okay.
reason. And the AI connection here is that AI can help you with that intellectual exploration process. For
Okay.
instance, right now I'm working on in my blog Nihongoism. I'm working on uh, the question of body and mind,
Okay.
body and soul. Okay, how is body and soul represented in the Japanese language,
Okay.
and how does the way it's represented in the language connect to the way that Japanese people actually conceive of
Okay.
body and soul?
Okay.
And I was researching soul, and all of a sudden, AI bots came up with fabulously interesting references to 1,000-year-old Japanese literature, where
That's very
that
interesting.
word for soul, which is still being used today, 1,000
Okay.
years later, uh, Japanese literature where that word is being used. So AI can help us in our process of intellectual appreciation of a foreign language.
That's very interesting. So what you're saying is Japanese, I mean, the AI is not only helping you build vocabulary, it is also helping you kind of search for some, let's say, some rare word you come across. You may not find it easily on internet, but AI programs will actually go and find it out, all those particular difficult words and how they connect into the Japanese, let's say, culture. And you can get a more kind of holistic view of the way of
Absolutely.
life and way of thinking using these words. So not just you are learning language superficially, but kind of since you are kind of finding the origins of those words, the relevance of those words, you are actually going deeper into the culture. And in a way, the learning of the language is more holistic, though we are using technology here like AI. Interesting.
Absolutely. You expressed it perfectly. I mean, the only caveat is that unfortunately, AIs are still right now in 2025 pretty suggestive and
Okay.
hallucinatory.
Right, right,
So
right.
they may hallucinate things about the Japanese language that you ask us, or if you sort of ask it a leading question, it may not examine your assumption properly.
Okay. Okay.
So in many cases, you want to, instead of, just asking a question, getting an answer, it's about one of these Japanese, maybe historical, cultural, linguistic issues. It's better to have a dialogue with the AI and
Hmm.
follow up and ask for clarifications and additional examples. And even you can even ask the AI to check itself, and you should.
Yes, no, using the prompts, basically kind of giving one more prompt that the answer you have given, can you just recheck it? Okay.
Yeah, exactly. Or you can tell it in advance, please check your work very carefully before you answer.
Correct. So, Bob, I wanted to kind of go slightly deeper into that question. So, as you mentioned already, because you see, a language can be pretty difficult thing to understand, right? There is a lot of complexity with syllables, grammar, emphasis, and a lot of cultural impacts, right? Do you think AI programs can easily deal with these complexities? I mean, let's say, uh, for example, in Chinese language, right, a lot of those words or letters are directly made out of pictures, right? And no, I don't know how proficient AI would be in kind of learning those kind of language aspects. And let's say somebody, some startup or some companies trying to create a AI powered software to understand languages. Okay, already it is pretty advanced, but where do you see the most of the complexities that one should be ready for?
Well, I mean, that would have been an extremely good question about 15 to 20 years ago.
Hmm.
15 or 20 years ago, I mean, I've been doing machine translation for at least 30 years.
Hmm.
Yeah, I remember attending a course at UCLA in the 1990s,
Hmm.
given by the leading lights of machine translation at the time. And it was completely manual, it was completely hard coded, it was completely non scalable. There were all these, it was essentially rule based, expert system like strategy. And it basically just did a horrible, horrible job, especially with languages which are linguistically distant from English,
English.
like
Okay.
Chinese or Japanese. It was essentially just completely unusable.
Hmm.
And the whole point is that the LLM world, the generative AI world, has completely turned that on its head. And the way that generative AI LLMs represent information is so flexible and fine grained and interrelated and so computationally powerful that I mean the AI doesn't stop and think about, oh, this is a funny looking character or anything. It you know, maybe there's uh, basically AIs, LLMs translate in spite of themselves. They translate by their nature. So, I mean, you can literally translate, you can feed a whole bunch of Japanese and English into a, you know, train it an LLM on Japanese and English. And you just say, tell me what you just said in Japanese, and it can do it perfectly. So,
Hmm.
the only possible limitation that we're facing in LLM or generative AI based machine translation is the available of source material
Right.
in all the languages. But you know, now, as you may know, people are experimenting with uh, approaches where they generate artificial source material.
Okay. I'm not aware about that.
Yeah, and they train it on that. So if they
Okay.
want to train it, you know, from English to Yoruba,
Hmm.
then they somehow create a whole bunch of fake Yoruba text, and then they translate it. They train it based on that.
Sounds a bit weird, but maybe it's an intellectual exercise where you can kind of invent a language and use AI for that. Interesting. So, Bob, tell me one thing. The advent of internet and chatting particularly had huge impact on the both the spoken and written languages, right? Many abbreviations like FYI, LOL, PFA, they became pretty commonplace, right? And do you think with the advent of AI will also have an impact on the nature of these languages? Like the actual languages will start changing because of AI?
Okay, well, PFA, by the way, I have to tell you, I never had even seen PFA before I went to India, and it threw me for a loop. It's only used in India, by the way. Don't try to use it over here. Um, but that's a really fascinating question, and I've been doing some thinking about it, but I haven't really come up with any conclusion that I'm totally comfortable with.
Okay.
I'll give you an example. Okay, I um, got a birthday email from my son. My birthday was Friday, and it was like really nice, long email talking about how like he's, you know, his kids are doing XYZ. He has a new baby, who's a month and a
Okay.
half old. All this stuff, and it was written in real. He's half Japanese and half American, but he's sort of more
Okay.
culturally Japanese. Um,
Interesting. Okay.
and that's another podcast we can have at some point.
Sure.
Uh, he so his native, I mean, he speaks English fluently, perfectly, I would
Mm.
say, but if
Okay.
sort of default, he would be Japanese. So he wrote this beautiful long Japanese letter, and I saw that, and I went to my wife and I said, I really honestly don't think that he wrote that. I think that the AI wrote it. And
Using Chat GPT or something. Okay.
yeah, yeah. So, in that sense, I guess you can make the case that maybe the advent of AI, if people are writing emails and asking AI to write their emails or even their chats, or even comments in a document like we do all the time at Google,
Mm-hmm.
Google, you write a comment in a document and you can literally tell AI to fix your comment.
Right.
Um, so I believe that it may result in sort of an elevation of the language and things that people can communicate might get slightly longer and slightly more sophisticated as the AI writes them. But on the other hand, over time, it could be the case that basically AI says everyone's talking to each other using AI. So why am I bothering putting all this flowery extra stuff in all of my messages? I'll just keep it to the bare minimum.
Okay. Okay.
So it could have the eventual effect of sort of, you know, reducing the way that we write to a simpler, kind of more direct. I don't really have any great insights beyond that.
Okay. That's very interesting, Bob. So, as you mentioned, right, like since everybody's using AI, there is no need to be very formal, and the AI programs the people who are writing those programs may feel like, what is the point if no people are actually producing the content? Everyone is just generating the content using AI, and both let's say, the person who is producing the produce and the person who is consuming that content, both are AIs only. What is the point of putting so much effort into that? Let it be direct, and
Exactly.
you know, why be so formal? In a way,
Exactly.
maybe it's good or bad.
That might actually, eventually affect human to human communication. Human to humans might say, well, the AI is going to just write such simple stuff. When I'm talking to you, if I'm going to, tell you my condolences on the death of your cat, why should I be so flowery about it? Just say, I'm sorry your cat died.
Right. This is a side question that came to my mind while we were talking about it. Is like, you know, since we go to schools and colleges and universities, right, we learn a lot about languages. There's a lot of emphasis on language. I don't know, you have spent some time in India also, but in India also languages are considered like the holy grail of education, particularly people who go into literature and arts, right, in that line. They study language very, very deeply. And it kind of stimulates their intellectual capabilities also, their way they look at things, the way they look at the world, right? With AI coming in picture and kind of doing everything automatically, do you think people, in a way, their intellectual capabilities can get dented because they will not have to use it now? And but again, I mean, do you think people may lose interest in learning literature and those kind of things because everything is anyway easy now with AI, and eventually their capabilities may get a bit. It may not take that shape it used to take, let's say, 10 years back.
Well, what a fascinating question. I'm not an expert on this, so it's like I'm just a complete rank amateur when it comes to questions like this. What popped into my mind when you said that was that, you know, this is not a philosophy podcast, right? But at some very high level, there's two schools of thought, which is that words lie at the basis of human cognition,
Right.
human thought. And then there's another school of thought, which is that human thought precedes words, and words are like a product of
Okay.
human thought. And um, I've always believed the latter, that there's a form of thought which is independent of language.
Basically, you can feel things, you can kind of, and whatever feelings you have, like even without describing them in words, you will feel things. So words is like a giving a picture of that for communication purpose, but not
It's
exactly
like
that. Okay, that's
words
very
are just
interesting.
like, clicking the shutter on your
Mm,
camera on your thought.
mm, right.
So if you believe that theory of
Mm,
life, then
mm,
it could actually, the opposite could actually occur. It could be that the fact that currently people who are all tangled up in words
okay,
being
okay.
and getting confused with words being the same as thoughts or thoughts being the same
Mm,
as words,
mm,
once words become less important because they can be like automatically produced in
mm,
any language at any time by any AI, that will free them up to
okay.
get back to a state where they're spending more time with their pre-verbal thoughts.
That's very, very interesting to hear, Bob. Basically, what you're saying is people take a lot of time and effort to learn a language, but you have to also understand that that language is just for communication, right? What you're feeling, what you're thinking, you want to communicate that. It doesn't mean that you cannot feel or think something without the communication. Communication is not as important as the person, the state of mind itself. And if the focus goes away from learning the languages or putting so much focus on words and sentences, then the focus will be on actually what you are feeling. You will try to understand that better. And that may be great thing to happen actually. And that's interesting. Okay. Bob, one last question.
Yes.
You're thinking something, I think. Go ahead. You're saying something?
Well, I was just going to say that there's an entire group of people who spend their entire lives developing artificial languages that are like used in
Hmm.
movies and stuff, right?
Right.
And sort of parallel to that, there's also a different theory that 12,000 years ago there was a single human language that was the language invented by the first tribe that started speaking,
Hmm.
and that language gradually, as geographically humans migrated, that language gradually evolved into, the 8,000 languages that we have today in the world.
Hmm.
But I'm interested in having an AI develop a new human language, a that takes into account everything we know about all existing languages, about the human thought process, and comes up with a new sort of verbal representation of reality. Um, I think we're probably gonna have to wait for AGI, for 5 or 10 years from now. But I'll
Hmm.
go out on a limb and I'll make a prediction here that 10 years from now, we may all be communicating using a new language which was invented for us by AI.
If that happens, that would be very, very both interesting and both weird. But it can definitely happen for what you know, because as you mentioned, right, the power of AI is pretty high, and eventually language is just words. All the languages in all the countries, right, more or less they do the same thing. So it shouldn't be a very difficult task for AI to invent a new language, kind of map multiple
Exactly.
languages to a single language, and it can have
Exactly.
so yeah,
Exactly. It should
that's
not be
interesting.
hard for an
Yeah.
AGI.
In fact, I think there was a news where I think Mark Zuckerberg said, right, that there were languages getting invented automatically by AI machines, and eventually they stopped them. But just out of context. Uh, Bob, so I was saying, I just one last question that I wanted to ask is, what is your secret of learning so many languages and becoming natural at them? Kind of what's your motivation and how have you learned so, because Japanese, and I think you also know Chinese, right? So and
Uh,
pretty different word of languages, right? How have you managed to learn so many different languages?
well, it's I haven't learned that many, but the I see these segments on YouTube saying like, "Whoa, this guy learned 24 languages. Let's talk to him and see how he learned 24 languages." I actually don't believe anybody speaks 24 languages
Mm-hmm.
fluently in the sense that
Okay.
they knew all the words and concepts that one would normally expect someone speaking that language to know. They may be able to say, hello or,
Mm-hmm.
but I think there's two aspects to it. One is I don't think there's any replacement at this point in time until we get to some kind of injections, brain injections that
Mm-hmm.
you know reform your neural structures for a different language. I don't believe there's any alternative for a lot of very hard work. You have to read books, you have to listen to things, you have to learn vocabulary, you have to
Mm-hmm.
spend probably several hours, depending on the language, several hours a day just
Mm-hmm.
studying hard for, several years.
Mm-hmm.
But the second thing is that, especially with Japanese, uh, it's not so much the case with Romance languages, but for English speakers, Japanese, has a is backwards from English.
Okay. Okay.
You say you start off by giving a whole bunch of preliminary information and give the entire background. I mean, in a book,
Mm-hmm.
in like a book, you might give one page that was in one sentence just of background and the actual predicate that what's
Okay.
in linguistic sense is called the head occurs at
Mm-hmm.
the end.
In Japanese. Okay.
Whereas in English, it's reversed. So
Mm-hmm.
basically, it requires this sort of, you know, mental switch, like the same mental switch required to switch from driving on the right side of the road to the left side.
Okay. Okay.
And I think some people, I don't want to say it's genetic or anything, but I think some people just have a much harder time like making that fundamental switch, that mental flexibility that's required. So maybe those are people that should just say, I'll make more use of AI to communicate in foreign languages.
So what I understand is like some people are simply natural at learning multiple languages because they have this capacity to kind of even though because some languages are very very different the way they are conceived itself. Instead of going from subject to predicate and object, they are backwards. And okay, that's very interesting. And probably you are also one of those people who have flair for learning languages and going into the depths of it. That's why you have learned so many languages pretty kind of with
I
some depth.
mean, I'm blessed, I guess. For me, Japanese especially was, you know, I won't say it was easy, but it was extremely natural process to learn it.
Okay, okay, interesting. Thanks, Bob, for joining us on this podcast. I mean, it was a great pleasure. We discussed technology, we discussed language, and to an extent, we also went into philosophy. All the viewers who are watching this, if you can speak or write into multiple languages, do let us know into comments. Uh, what motivates you to learn multiple languages? And also, if you have been using AI in any aspect like learning languages or translation, that would be fun to know. And Bob, thank you for joining. Any last words, and then we can wrap up.
Yeah, so don't forget to subscribe to this podcast and also don't forget to subscribe to my blog, Nihongoism.
Sure. Maybe you can just give me a link and I can put it in the description. And
Okay.
people, who all the viewers, do subscribe to Better Engineering and Management podcast and also subscribe to Bob's Substack. I am unable to pronounce that, but I would definitely give a link to that in the description. And do follow Bob. He's very good at Japanese. And if you are interested in Japanese or any other language, you would learn a lot there, I believe. So thank you for watching. Have a nice day.
Thank you.